This was the best investment that I ever made in my entire life. A lot of people fall into the trap of not investing a lot into their own personal development. And then they end up paying for that, not in cold hard cash, but in unnecessary suffering, unnecessary confusion, delusion, a lot of mistakes that they could have totally avoided, etc. So although $20,000 sounds like a lot of money, this happened over the course of many years, about 7+ years. And it's just such an obvious to me that this is the wisest thing to do. That without really dropping money on your own personal growth, you're going to be stuck. You're just going to remain stuck where you're at in a lot of the same problems, a lot of the same patterns repeating themselves. And why would you really want that? Right? So moving on, I want to begin to share with you some of the things and some of the benefits of this. And a lot of this stuff is going to be kind of nuanced, so I can't give you all the little details in this video because it's just one YouTube video. But I want you to get a little bit of an idea of how helpful this actually is. How powerful this kind of work actually is. And this isn't like superficial self-help where all we're doing is lifting weights and we're chads now. But like very deep psychological and spiritual work that bleeds into every single category of your life. So for starters, imagine never being confused about relationships ever again. That sounds pretty good, I bet. You're just not confused about relationships ever, right? I'm not talking about not having struggles, not having a problem. What I'm talking about is that you're not confused about the problem. You're not confused about the challenge or struggle. And you actually can foresee this stuff because you understand how relationships work. So personally, for me, I've read dozens of books on relationships. And this is going to be a common theme in this video. I've read dozens of books on blah, blah, blah. So relationships specifically. I've read books on spiritual perspectives of relationships, like the work of David Data or John Wellwood or Robert Augustus Masters, all the way to more psychotherapeutic sort of ways of looking at relationships, like You Are the One You've Been Waiting For by Richard Schwartz. Just a whole lot of books, stuff by Judith Blackstone as well. So psychotherapeutic, psychological, spiritual, neurobiological, scientific, etc. Very practical stuff as well. Models by Mark Manson. Really good book. So you get the point. You basically just kind of take a lot of information, synthesize it, so that your understanding of relationships is so good that a lot of the unnecessary confusion ceases to exist because you are no longer ignorant, essentially. Right? You're not in the dark about this kind of stuff. You understand how to have a conscious relationship. The psychotherapeutic aspect of relationships is a really interesting one. A lot of people don't really think of this when they're thinking of relationships, but essentially when you're in an intimate relationship with someone, their trauma, their wounding, this is in the relationship. Same thing with your own trauma, your own wounding, a lot of your own patterns. So you have to actually have a good model of psychotherapy and psychology to really have the most fruitful relationship, the most conscious relationship. To be honest, this is really essential if you have high standards, if you really want to have the top quality relationships. This is a must. Without this, there's going to be unnecessary suffering and an inability to navigate certain dimensions of relationship. Moving on is, imagine not being confused about what career path fits with you. Imagine having a career built off of your own core values. Imagine having a career where you can provide very positive value to people rather than selling them prescription drugs that are actually no good for them and are whatever, I won't even get into that, or stocking the shelves and putting pop or soda on shelves, drinks that are full of heavy metals and stuff. All right, so imagine crafting a career, especially over time, right, where you have a vision for your career, where the money you make is going to be clean money that actually provides meaningful value to people because you actually fucking care about them, right? And then the work you do fits your own psychology. It fits your own emotional system. It fits your values. It fits your nervous system. It fits your being, right? So moving on, imagine being clear about your own well-being. Imagine knowing how to take care of your physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual needs. Right? Imagine being able to just feel well in your body. Like the default state is just feeling relaxed, having a not tense body, an open body to the present. a clear mind. Not that you don't ever have some kind of health struggle ever in your life, but clear as in you know very well how to take care of your own well-being. Most people don't ever read a book on diet ever in their life. Right? And meanwhile, you're eating every single day. Right? And of course, there's a lot of different diet ideologies, but even beyond ideology, most people don't ever learn how to tune into their own body well. Your body knows exactly what it needs. Your nervous system knows exactly what kind of foods it needs. Right? But there's a lack of sensitivity to it that kind of just, it disconnects you from that. So overall, imagine just simply feeling well in your body. Like your body's not just this chronically heavy, tense place of sickness, right? I have a lot of compassion for the struggles of people. But just imagine just feeling really fucking good in your life because you know how to take good care of yourself. Moving on, imagine being clear about how to move to higher levels of consciousness and psychological development. A lot of people don't even know that there's such things as levels of psychological development and evolution to the human identity, to the ego, evolution of human values, evolution of human morals. People don't even recognize that there's levels of human consciousness. And higher levels of consciousness are significantly better for navigating life in a more accurate way, in a healthier way. And as you're able to raise your consciousness, your mind becomes more pure. Your emotions can be more fluid. You can process them better. Right? You basically bring awareness into every section of your life, and every section of your life becomes a vehicle for consciousness to move into the world of form deeper and deeper and deeper. And you experience far more fulfillment and overall clarity at higher levels of development. This is just a byproduct of higher levels of consciousness. Moving on is the importance of mindfulness meditation. I can't even really go into detail on this one, but this is the most important thing. This was the most important thing I ever did for myself. Been doing this one for 7+ years for about an hour a day. On top of that, I spent a lot of money going on multiple meditation retreats for days on end, sitting for like many hours per day, like a third or more of the day. And essentially, I'll give you a little bit of an idea of how powerful this is. Your subconscious mind controls 90 to 95% of your life, and you're not very aware of it. And it's basically executing patterns over and over and over again. And these patterns are dictating 90 to 95% of your life. So the second you can start becoming conscious of yourself, your emotional patterns, belief systems, thought patterns, behavioral patterns, your habits, when you can apply presence to a lot of this stuff, it's easy to make changes. You can actually become more malleable. It's easier to shift who you actually are in the ways that you actually really desire. So shifting who you are in terms of creating a version of you that's more healthy, better at relationships, has a more fulfilling career, for example. And then on top of that, meditation goes beyond just personal growth. Meditation at its core is actually an inquiry into the very nature of being, nature of existence, really. Self-inquiry, Vipassana, a lot of Buddhist traditions, branches of Hinduism, of Vedanta, go into more depth of this. And this is actually one of my later points that I'm going to be talking about. But overall, don't sleep on meditation. If you've never done it in your life, it seems silly to just sit down and do nothing, but I want to remind you of the basic fact that life is very counterintuitive. It's very much not what you think it is. Sitting down, doing nothing, and observing the present liberates you from your own reactivity towards the present, because we're always kind of just reacting to what's going on in our experience. When you can learn to observe your mind, observe your emotions, observe what's going on inside your own experience and, in the world, you can relate to it in a significantly more healthy and functional way. You can actually change it in a more meaningful and healthy way as well, rather than just always in reactivity mode. And it's easy for the mind to come inside this whole conversation and delude itself and say, I'm not reacting to life all the time. I already know how to do all this stuff. Meditation is a bunch of bullshit, etc. And that's basically just a delusion. The truth is that, yes, you are reacting quite a lot to what is happening. You're not really just sitting with awareness, with presence. It's just one reactive moment to another reactive moment. There's no shame in it as well. I don't want you to interpret this as me shaming you. I'm just honestly trying to go through some of my points relatively fast. So it might come off like that. But I'm not shaming you. We just want to know what's true about our experience. We want to use meditation to just observe our experience and just discover what's actually true about our actual selves and our direct experience. On top of that, meditation is so powerful for regulating emotion and grounding into your body and recognizing the intelligence and pure wisdom of your body, of your nervous system. Your body's always guiding you from place to place to place. It's your nervous system that's actually making so many of the decisions that you make in your life. And when you have an unregulated nervous system that you're unconscious of, your life is going to be dictated by unconscious forces. That's not that great. It is what it is. Moving on, an extremely advanced view of human psychology and human consciousness that you won't get from going to school. I've read hundreds of psychology books at this point, hundreds of advanced books on spirituality, not BS belief spirituality, but actual inquiries into the nature of reality that I will be talking about very shortly once again. And the understanding that I have of human psychology is not something that you can get just from going to school for, we'll say, 4 years. It simply isn't. It's a lie. If you think that you're just going to go to school and then you'll have this radically deep understanding of human psychology, you're lying to yourself. The understanding that you can get from human psychology simply by reading books by people at high levels of psychological development deeply exceeds the value of what you can get from school. Of course, you might go to school to further your career, but when it comes to the pure learning aspect, the pure wisdom aspect, the pure developmental aspect, I'd have a strong disagreement there. I really don't believe school does an effective job at truly educating people in a lot of the more nuanced ways that a lot of psychologically evolved people do in their books, for example. And they just kind of pass on their wisdom to you. People like Ken Wilber, Robert Keegan, Judith Blackstone, Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers, Scott Barry Kaufman. I can honestly just go on forever, so I'm really going to stop now. Rollo May. Okay, moving on. Right? Not moving on. Why not? You can literally read the work of geniuses just by buying their book and absorbing it. And then you become a genius because you've just absorbed so much high consciousness, highly evolved information. This literally transforms your mind in ways that I do not see happening in any kind of mainstream institution. That's it. That's my rant. So, moving on is how humans and cultures develop. So I talked briefly about psychological development, levels of consciousness, etc. But imagine having a very clear idea on how humans and cultures evolve. There's an actual development and progression to culture. Right? There's a huge blind spot within most people, and that's basically the ignorance of how we actually progress as a species. Looking into models like ego development theory or spiral dynamics. These are very powerful. And then really reading a lot of books on them. So imagine just having a very clear model in your mind of how society progresses. Imagine having a very clear model in your mind of how your own psychology is going to develop. Imagine knowing the roadmap of your own personal development instead of just kind of being lost in the dark, shooting into the dark. Imagine having a very powerful guiding force. Right, so again, just some models: ego development theory, spiral dynamics, moral development theory, the work of Piaget, the work of Abraham Maslow. A lot of people see Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They kind of oversimplify it, when in actuality, his work is very profound. If you read Toward a Psychology of Being, The Further Reaches of Human Nature, The Psychology of Science, etc., he's a genius. Moving on. The nature of reality, how to become conscious of it, and ultimately transcending the ego. So this is an interesting point because a lot of people believe that you can't know what reality is. You just can't do that. Wrong. Very, very wrong. That is an assumption that is so far off the mark. I'm not even going to bother getting into it right here. But you can become conscious of what reality is. Like the actual thing. You ever wonder, like, what is this reality thing? What is this? What am I? You ever wonder that? You can actually realize for yourself what that is without needing to believe what I say, without needing to believe what any one of these books says. But the thing is that learning from other teachers and masters and people with more wisdom and experience than you, it's a powerful guiding force. All right, so you got to have some humility and some openness here, but this isn't a dogma. Like, that's the whole point I'm trying to make here. This isn't like a belief system that you now believe in. It's like a direct awareness of, like, this is the absolute truth of what reality is. There's nothing beyond the absolute. Like, you can do that. This is a possibility. Because your reality. What's true about your own nature is true about reality, because you're reality. You're not a separate thing from reality. What you are is what reality is. So why don't you just figure out what you are? What are you? Have you ever really seriously inquired into what you are? Moving on is a great epistemology. Epistemology is the theory of knowledge, or how to know what is true. And nowadays, especially around the time of the US election, it's so obvious the amount of traps, ideological traps that exist that your mind can kind of fall prey into, right? And then kind of just get stuck in them. Because all these ideological traps, they act as their own reality bubble, and then they don't really recognize that they are their own reality bubble, and they just say, nope, this is just what reality is, and this is how it works. And people in both sides of the political spectrum do that. People in science do that. People in religion do that. People everywhere do that. Right? So having a great epistemology, having a mind that can actually discover what is true, that can have an accurate perception of reality, this is essential for your survival. Since your mind is actually always trying to figure out how to get its needs met by mapping reality in order to navigate it, without a good mental model, you can't navigate it very well. Your ability to simply be well is going to decrease. So one core way that I actually developed a very good epistemology was literally just by reading hundreds of books by people who read hundreds of books by people who read hundreds of books. So that the big picture of life kind of just begins to like unfold before my very eyes. You can't unsee what has been seen. So reading books from all spiritual traditions, religious traditions, reading books by enlightened masters of, throughout history and living ones nowadays. Reading books by the famous quantum physicists like Schrödinger and Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg and Einstein. Reading books from science and psychology and psychotherapy, all that stuff. You build this big picture point of view of reality, to the point where your ability to discover what is actually true is pretty good. Your sense making is a skill that has to be worked on. If you don't work on sense making, you're not going to be able to make good sense of the world. Again, it's a skill like building a muscle. If you want to have big muscles, you got to work on your ability to lift heavy weights repetitively. Right? Speak of the devil, hundreds of perspectives and integrating them into my worldview is the next point. So being completely absolutist about any one particular relativistic point of view, like science or the contents of spirituality, like just no self in Buddhism, like going 100% absolutist into these relativistic points of view is an error. There is an absolute truth. You can actually discover that. But really, just integrating and synthesizing hundreds of points of view. This makes your mind able to jump between all kinds of different contexts that reality can be interpreted within. So one example of this is things I just said, like the absolute context and the relativistic context, which ultimately aren't separate from one another. And then you can interpret things from, let's say, an evolutionary context to a chemical context or whatever, spiritual context. You can really just use all this information to interpret life from various perspectives, and these perspectives all have their own unique value to them that can be organized into a cohesive view of the world, thus increasing your ability to make good sense of it and navigate it effectively. It's very much worth it. So that's it for this video. If you want to work with me, you can apply to do so. Link is in the pinned comment. Take it easy.